My name is John Dakin. I'm chair of the AEU membership committee, and we are sponsoring a suite of workshops today, 4 workshops today, and this is the third of 4. This is probably the presentation that is most my own. I'll be helping out with a presentation to discuss how societies can rejuvenate themselves or re-enliven themselves, along with Carolyn Parker and Chris Kamen at 4:30. This one's more a presentation that comes more from myself. However, it's new. It's a new area that I am experimenting in part based on some learning I had from one James Croft. And I am so pleased that he is able to join us today to be a discussant in about the middle third of today's presentation. So a little bit more about me. I am a member of the Washington Ethical Society. I'm a past president. I've been a member for about 25 years or so. I met my wife at the Washington Society, and we have 2 kids who came up through the SEEK program. And let me just mention I use he, him pronouns. I would like to say a little bit about our discussant, James Croft. Dr. James Croft is the leader of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, one of the largest humanist congregations in the world. As clergy for one of the few thriving congregations for people without a traditional faith, James is reimagining religion for a secular age. He's dedicated his life to helping people ask the big questions. Why are we here? How should we treat each other? Where are we going? And is a popular speaker on matters of religion, ethics, and philosophy in the US and internationally. He lives in St. Louis, Missouri, with his fabulous drag queen husband, Colton, and their darling chihuahua, Ella. Welcome, James.
Thanks, John.
So I am going to be showing a slide set from my computer. So I'm hoping this will work well. We'll give it a try. All right. So I need to advance the slide and it's not allowing me to. There we go. So this is a presentation. Let me back up just a second. This is a presentation about new society development. And what this means is the development of individuals and groups who hope to become ethical societies. So they're not societies at the outset. So how can we develop nascent groups so that they may one day become ethical societies and spread the good news to additional people in their communities? And so I wanted to take a page from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and try to begin with the end in mind. And so what you'll see here is this is a little bit of a schematic I put together just to kind of show what we might think as a notional idea of an ethical society, where we have, this is probably about 1/3 scale. So we have, let's imagine 150 people on a Sunday, over 200 members. We have a board. P stands for the president. There's a certified leader who's on staff. This is what I might picture, and maybe some of you might picture, as a thriving ethical society, what we'd love to help new individuals and groups to become. But at the beginning, there's usually an individual. And so how do we move from there? So I would characterize that individual as having a dream, of having a vision. And I'll talk in a few minutes about where that might come from, where it does come from. But it certainly isn't this. So how do we get from this to this? It's quite a long path. So I'd like to start with a little bit of a historical context by taking us back in time to the 1870s. And I'd like to introduce a couple of, in 1880s, a couple of characters in our story. This is Samuel Adler, father of our own Felix Adler. He served as the head rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in New York City from 1857 to 1874. Born in Germany in 1809 and died in New York City in 1891. I don't know a lot about his history off the top of my head. What I do know is he helped bring Reform Judaism to America, and he had prepared his son Felix to assume responsibilities for the synagogue after he retired. Here is his son, Felix Adler, 1851 to 1933. And it looks like I've already made a mistake here because I've listed his father's title next to him. Of course not. He ended up serving as the leader of the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and I don't have the dates in front of me, so please pardon the typo. This is William McIntyre Salter. You see his dates there. He was the leader of the second society in the movement, where he served for 15 years from 1883 to 1898, and went on to be leader of the Philadelphia Ethical Society after that in the 1900s. So let's turn back to our individual. So let's imagine that this individual is Felix Adler. Not just any individual, of course, but he did start out as an individual with this vision that he cultivated during his studies in Germany. He returns from Germany. His father has all prepared for him to assume responsibilities for the synagogue, and gives him the floor to speak to Temple Emmanuel. And what happens? Adler speaks of his vision for a new religion. What does the congregation have to say? They were not feeling it. It was not well received. So now what can happen? There were individuals in the synagogue who were quite interested in what he had to say. And they loved his presentation, and they wanted to see him continue his work, continue his lectures. And they approached Cornell University and succeeded in convincing the department chair at Cornell University to offer Adler a professorship in the Department of Hebrew and Oriental Literature. He gave his lectures there. The students loved it. The administration, not so much. The benefactors continued to offer to actually fund his position there, but no success. So now here we are again. So here's a situation in which this young man has really made the case for his new religion, his new vision. It hasn't worked with his father's congregation. He was offered a real opportunity right off the bat, and it didn't fly. He was offered an opportunity for lecturing at Cornell. It didn't work out, but there was still another opportunity. So on Saturdays, people would attend Temple Emmanuel. And as I understand it, on Sundays, they cross Central Park to listen to Felix Adler. And this group loved what they heard. So now what? These are predominantly a well-off community, and they realized that they could, at least some of them could, fund Adler's continued service as a lecturer, and in time, of course, so much more. And I am probably filling in some blanks, perhaps inaccurately, but I think one thing is likely, which is they were able to put together a board of individuals capable of providing the funding that Adler needed to support himself and his family and to support his work. And in time, here we are, the New York Society for Ethical Culture. But the point I want to make is, as far as I can tell in thinking about this, this was Adler thought of himself as a lecturer, and his work was mostly funded through wealthy benefactors that were a small subset of the total number of people who heard him speak and benefited from his work. And the challenge is in how replicable is this? So I want to extend the historical example a little further to talk a little bit about the founding of the Second Ethical Society. So I believe it was in 1871, I'm getting the dates wrong, 1880s, I believe, he encountered William Salter. Salter had studied theology, but ultimately had become disenchanted. But as a result of a chance meeting of Adler on the train, encountered Adler and his ideas and was very taken with him, and they formed a deep and lasting friendship. So Adler goes to Chicago because he wants to try to get his movement established in America's second city. And he traveled and gave a series of 6 lectures in the early 1880s, I believe 1882, 1883, gave a series of lectures in Chicago. And they loved it. And after he returned back to New York, a group was formed in order to try to start an ethical society in Chicago. And a subgroup, more than 3, but a little easier to show on here, a subgroup went to New York and met with Adler to talk about candidates to become lecturer for the nascent Chicago Society. Adler suggested Salter, introduced them, they made preliminary arrangements, then returned to Chicago. Now, again, I'm filling in the blanks, but my guess is they talked about Adler, they talked about Salter, probably based a lot on Adler, based on Adler's description of his new religion, but ultimately decided, yes, they wanted to call Salter to be their lecturer in Chicago. They were able to raise funds, and my understanding is that, in effect, a little like a university might have an endowed chair, they were able to raise the funds to support Salter getting started. And then we have the Society for Ethical Culture of Chicago. And as far as I can tell, is my understanding, once again, wealthy benefactors supporting the lecturer and the work of the society, but again, not something being funded from the grassroots. So if we can return back to our individual, how do we move from an individual if we're not to be relying upon this particular mode of funding? One of the things that I think that is worth considering is that over time we have tried to move away from situations in which we have philanthropy funded by a few number of people with deep pockets who sometimes can steer where funds go, can sometimes steer a narrative. A lot of our work in trying to deconstruct systems of authority, trying to undo centralization of authority, has been to try to undo the influence of unequal distribution of wealth, et cetera. So what can it look like if we don't have this sort of model of funding, where we would have lecturers, to have leaders be supported and funded in a more of a grassroots, more of an equitable, more of a flat sort of an organizational way? And honestly, I don't think it's something that comes easily. So we may have an individual who has a dream. And in this case, let's imagine this is not someone who is a lecturer, who is not an ethical culture leader themselves, but perhaps is just an individual in a community who is wanting to try to move something forward. Do we want this sort of arrangement? So let's see. So here's me. This is my picture. So I can go to a lecture hall and I can talk to some people. I've given platforms, and maybe there's enough money raised to pay for the coffee. Sunday assembly. are able to sponsor very entertaining, engaging events, but they're have challenges being able to raise large amounts of funding, and they tend to be self-funded. They tend to rely a lot on volunteer labor. There is something to be had when you're able to build organizations that are able to engage professional leadership. But the challenge is how you get to begin with the end in mind. How do you get to that idea of a mid-sized ethical society that has professional staff, might have a building? And so that's a lot of what I have been working to try to learn more about and to understand how that might occur. So let's picture, what might it look like if our ethic, one of the talks that we had today, one of the presentations was about what we might learn from the Quakers. And one of the things I think we can learn from the Quakers is the way that they have a distributed faith, the way that they have a faith in every individual. Of course, they're predominantly theistic. They see the spark of the divine in every individual, but that's not quite so far away from the idea of ethical goodness residing in every single individual. So what could it be like if we had people who connect, not as a result of a financial transaction, but because they come to connect with one another around a shared love of the right, shared love of goodness, of higher ethical ideals, and our version of the golden rule? What might that look like? How could that be built upon so that you can slowly scale it up? So one of the things, as a chance encounter I had this past springtime, a young man attended a platform address at the Washington Ethical Society, and he and I began chatting, and he explained that he had grown up in the Assemblies of God, evangelical Christian denomination, where he had been a youth pastor. He had helped to establish a youth group as part of a new congregation they were forming. And then as a young adult, he had helped to found a Christian denomination. He found a new congregation. Over time, by the time he reached age 30 or so, he began to lose his faith, and an organization called the Oasis Network, headquartered in Houston, helped him find humanism as an alternative. He moved to Washington for work, and that through that move, he found the American Humanist Association and the Washington Ethical Society. And he and I have had hours of conversations about what he learned establishing congregations. And he actually went to training and learned social science research conducted by the Assemblies of God on how to start congregations. And this is the model that they employ. The approach they employ is very much based on a heart connection between peers, between lay people. At the very first stages, it is a connection around a shared faith. And of course, for them, it's a shared faith in Christianity. You might have a shared faith in Judaism, but I see no reason, and nor does he, why that shared faith cannot be ethical religion. Could that be scaled up from there? Could it be possible for individuals to connect around this, for them to build connections with one another? So that it's not, if you notice, I've dimmed that center image a little bit, because what's really palpable is the connection between those individuals. And what Michael explained to me, this gentleman that I met who had left Assemblies of God, what he explained to me was that in the Assemblies of God, they taught him that if you move too quickly to begin having large scale events, what happens is that you shortchange individuals as they're working to build these initial connections, and it loses steam. And indeed, one of the things I've seen is that in some of our groups that are working to try to form, that first got their start a few years ago, when they move pretty quickly to using Meetup, to using, now with the pandemic, using Zoom, having monthly events, that what ends up happening is people attend, but like I was showing a few minutes ago, if I'm giving a talk, there's enough money for coffee. Um, they have people attend, but it's a low commitment, low contribution situation, and the organizers pretty quickly get worn out from the effort. Whereas this sort of approach is low key, it's focused, like I said, on a heart connection. It is to a certain extent based on a shared attraction to humanistic religion, but it is in community. It is in this context of connection with one another. So I just want to take a moment to organize my notes. So only after a group like this has been meeting for a period of time is there then the opportunity to begin to spread out and begin to reach out to other people, and only in a limited way. And then once you have a group of about that size, then they're ready to start getting some assistance. And that can take the form of getting some outside help. Typically, you are likely to have one particular individual who is more of the organizer of the effort. But the role that they play is not as significantly different as might be in a situation with professional leadership. So again, that still hasn't gotten to this role. So how do we get from there to here? So let's scale back a little bit, and here's this individual. And this is something, having been following up phone calls and email that come into the AEU office for 2 years now. I'm about a year and a half now. What I find is that usually there's an individual who either encounters our writings on their own, this sometimes occurs, or sometimes they hear about it from our website, or they learn about an ethical society. James, one individual I'm working with, I think, as I told you, learn about ethical culture from your May 8th event, actually. However they hear about us, the next step is how to support them. And so one of the things that we recently put in place was to create a set of standard processes to help to connect these pioneers with someone from the AEU. Bart Warden has been working with several groups and individuals, and I've been helping out a little bit more in recent months. And I've been doing quite a bit of that myself. And so I'll describe mostly what I have from my own personal experience in working with several groups that are in process right now. And it's to kind of practice what I've been preaching a little bit, which is to try to work on building that heart connection. What do they love about the philosophy they've discovered about us? Would they like to learn more? Do they want to be offered opportunities to deepen their learning and appreciation of it? Or are they really wanting just someone to support them as they start to think about what sort of projects they want to do? And people vary in terms of how much they want to think about the big thoughts and to what extent they want to actually start to connect with other people and start to get involved in their communities. This, I think, of the whole talk is, I think, for me, the most important step of this kind of low-key grassroots society development process. And that is backing away again. And kind of giving this person, I won't say staying out of their way, but giving this person the space they need to be able to have the confidence and to be seen as the pioneer they are as they begin to make connections in their local community. To give them the opportunity to begin drawing some kind of a fuzzy boundary as they begin to build the building blocks of their, hopefully, future society. And these initial connections, once again, I haven't done the graphic to show the heart connections, but these are rooted in the idea of making personal connections within individuals. You don't see us using Meetup or a Facebook group or any sort of a platform address. Rather, these are individual connections and conversations about the very basic ideas that were mentioned when I was reading James's bio. What are we about? What does this life have meaning for me? What is Where did I come from? Where will I go? How will I traverse the stages of my life in a way that's meaning making? How can I serve my community? There are certainly opportunities to make use of resources, and that's one thing that this person hanging off to one side can do, of course, is to remind the organizer of opportunities to attend platforms, to attend assembly, to obtain online materials, etc., just to kind of help making sure there's some wind in their sails, but all the while remaining relatively off stage in order to help their growing small L leadership in their growing group. Now, one of the things that might occur to you is what you see here is the beginnings of an organizing team for the eventual events and work that it's going to take to actually build an organization. So, think of some of these entrepreneurs in a garage in Silicon Valley. This is where those early connections can be made. So as they start to grow, we hope more programs can be made available to them. And I'm happy to say that a couple of the groups that I'm working with right now have grown to this size in about in 6 months or so, 6 months or less. Now, to me, that sounds pretty fast. Maybe not to you, but the kind of connections that are being built are the kind of connections that lay the foundation for later. Theoretically, once a group gets large enough, it's going to be time to try to actually provide more substantive assistance. And this is where hopefully there's been enough of an establishment made that the group can stand enough on its own that it can accept more explicit and overt outside help. And this is where professional leadership can come in. And I'm hoping to hear from our leader discussant about his thoughts about this. One of the things that the literature says is the role of a professional in this kind of situation is also low key, crossing the boundary into the organization, but in a way that does not displace the lay leadership that's already been established within that boundary, but instead to offer an extra push for that philosophy to help to inspire the group, because they won't have significant funding necessarily unless the denomination has enough to provide sustained salary funding for the leader, which many denominations, including ours, are unlikely to be able to do. It's likely this person will be having a somewhat brief sojourn. As it happens, the interim leader for the Washington Ethical Society themselves served as a part-time leader for a congregation of 35 people in the UU church for about 5 or 6 years. And I had an opportunity to talk to them a little bit. This is Lynn Cox, to talk to them a little bit about the techniques they employed to make that work. And a lot of it had to do with inspiration, pastoral care on a part-time basis, but also just, being away sometimes as well, because in between visits, the local members need to keep things moving forward. At some point, if all goes well, and this is a very real challenge to get there. I don't have my gallery view, but Patty, I think, is here, and she will attest to how hard it is to translate this into what's called a quote unquote family size congregation, where you have enough people to really have a robust group. Maybe they can rent a building. They will be in a position to be able to bring in part-time professional leadership or consulting leadership. This is where the AEU has been able to provide some seed funding to help support getting the ball rolling for consulting leadership. And theoretically, if all goes well, over time, you can make your way to the goal we dream about, which is to create new bona fide ethical societies. I think that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So thank you. And I'm back off of my slide share. I'm glad you're all still there. It was filling my screen, so I couldn't tell if anyone was there. So I think this is my opportunity to go ahead and pause, and I invite James onto the stage, and I look forward to his remarks.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate. 1 second. Can you hear me, folks? Okay, good. Zoom kind of spaced out on me for a second there. I appreciate what you're doing and what you presented there, and it raised a lot of really interesting questions for me and things that I think we should all be thinking about that are clearly at the top of your mind. In general, I think the process that you've described sounds really reasonable. It makes a lot of sense about how we should go about creating new ethical societies. One of the things that came out for me about your little kind of history of our movement is that church planting, to use the common phrase for what we're trying to do, is really in our movement's blood. You know, we were started by someone who was an enthusiastic and successful church planter who went around the United States and internationally successfully planting new congregations in the movement. And so it's something that is entirely within keeping with our values and our history to do again. And I'm really excited that you put so much thought into a model about how to do that. The second thing that really leapt out to me, which it would be my kind of big picture message for everyone, is the extraordinary benefit of listening to and working with experts. Michael is an expert, right? He has done this for many years, and so he knows what works and what doesn't work. I experience a tendency in our movement to be quite resistant to taking expertise from the religious space, from the traditional religious space, and applying it in our own efforts. But here I think we really should do so, because the honest truth is that I'm not an expert in church planting. No one in the movement is really an expert in church planting. We don't have a recent record of wild success and starting new societies. So we clearly have a lot to learn from people who have had more success than us. And there are ways that we can learn from them. So we can seek out people like through the Clergy Network, which I think is a great resource for us, who have been professional church planters, and ask them how they did it, and build our whole system around what they say to do. Or if we can't find the people, we could always just read their books. There are, after all, literally hundreds of books and internet articles about how to successfully start congregational communities, and many of them are very valuable. And one of the things that jumped out to me in the model that you presented there, John, is that there's actually quite a lot of similarities between the model that you're moving towards and the model that people in these books and online resources suggest that church planters should use. So, for instance, I took this model from a book called Planting Missional Churches, Your Guide to Starting Churches That Multiply, which seems to be considered the most respected resource. It's written by two people with many decades of experience starting very many successful congregations. And it's the one that everyone says to read. So I read it in preparation for this session. And he has a very clear 5-part process for how you should build a new church. And it included a lot of the things that you said. So, firstly, you have to start in the community where you want to build the thing and find a group of leaders who wish to exercise leadership to create the community. Now, when I say leaders, I don't mean capital L leaders. It's incredibly unfortunate that our term for professional clergy is the same word as our term for people who exercise leadership in any capacity in a community. I think that too makes some people in our movement skeptical of leadership in general, because some of them are skeptical of leaders, professional clergy. And that's a mistake, because every congregation needs little L leaders, and you can't start a community without people willing to take the lead. And these models of church planting suggest that that's where you begin, with a small group of people. And those small groups of people make some decisions about the community that they want to build. So the first thing they decide is what structure they want to use, whether it's going to be in the Christian terminology, a pastor-led community, or a board who employs a pastor, or a pastor who uses a board but is not employed by them, right? There's a different relationship. Or what they suggest is a group of church elders, people who are very invested in the success of the community, one of whom plays the role of a pastor, right? Like, there's lots of different structures, but the church growth literature suggests that you should start by defining what structure you want to build and be very, very clear about that. Then, exactly as you're describing with your process, you develop that leadership team into a very closely connected group of people who have deep personal relationships, clear expectations of each other, and clear roles as to what they're going to do. And you put that network of local leaders in contact with coaches or mentors from the broader movement. So that point you might bring in someone like a professional leader or a successful lay leader in one of our societies to help them think through some of the challenges of coming up with the idea of the community they want to build. And the third step was really interesting to me because I think it's something that we do very infrequently in ethical societies, in my experience, which is you decide your focus audience within the community you want to serve. You don't try and make a community that's focused on everyone. You pick. You firstly you have to know the area that you're going to plant this community in, and who lives there and what they care about and what their needs are. And then you pick a subset of that community who are going to be your core membership. So maybe it's retirees with college degrees, or maybe it's young families with young children, or whatever it is, you pick a focused community that is going to be your core membership, and you develop everything towards that. Then you work to develop a launch team, which is a team of people who are specifically going to launch the community. And sometimes you can find those through literally advertising in the press. So we're trying to build this type of community. We'd like people to be involved. This is what skills we need. And you develop their relationship through doing leadership development events and practices. And then you have a launch date where you put all your resources into having the biggest possible launch you can. But you only do that after very many months of developing the core team and being very clear about who you're targeting and what you want to build. That sort of model seems to me eminently doable. I don't think it requires any resources that we don't have, and it follows best practices in the field. And it sounds like what you're describing has many elements of that, with the core leadership team that's developed first and which becomes clear about what they're trying to do. I still have question marks. Like, one big question mark is the end that you have in mind in your model the right one? I don't see why all our ethical societies eventually should aspire to having the professional leader and board and members model. My suspicion is that very few of them will get there, and that we shouldn't consider that failure. I think that just as there are countless Christian churches which are lay led and don't have any professional staff, or very few, and not a professional minister, we could have very successful ethical societies that don't even aspire to that model. And so I don't know that everything should be driving towards that. Um, and I have a question about the funding model. I think the funding model that John described in his presentation, about instead of relying on a few big donors or philanthropists, as it were, rich individuals, to give a ton of money to start an institution, we kind of do more grassroots funding and finding the resources within the community to start the congregation. Well, that's actually the most common funding model in the church planting world. Right? That's how most churches are started. You find the resources from within the community, and you communicate the value of the community to those people, and they start. It's how church like Saddleback got started, in the basement of some people's house, right? They got together and they pooled their resources and they decided they wanted to build a church. So I think that is perfectly reasonable to expect that our people will put some of their own resources on the table in order to start these new communities. I guess the final thing I'd say is that, as well as learning from experts, we can learn from the other people who are trying to do this. One of the projects I'm engaged in right now is to create a structure in which everybody building broadly, this is a difficult terminology, there's no term that encompasses everybody who's trying to do this, but broadly secular congregations, right? Everyone who's trying to build congregations outside traditional theistic religion can come together to share their experiences, their successes and failures. Because the truth is, the challenge of starting a new ethical society today is very similar to the challenge of starting starting a Sunday assembly group, or starting an Oasis network group, or starting a UU humanist congregation, or any of those people. And some of the people who have had the greatest success, like the Oasis Network, which I think is quite successful in starting and maintaining new communities, we should be talking to them. We should have dialogue with them all the time. We should be constantly sharing our experiences. And so, to that end, I've worked with some Sunday Assembly people this last month to develop an online space where people can do that. And if people are interested, they can join up. It's open, and you can share ideas and things that work in your ethical society. That will require us to build more of a learning mindset and a more openness to new ideas and new ways of doing things. I experience our movement sometimes as quite resistant to change and scared about new entrants into the marketplace. And I think that's a cultural shift we'll have to go through together to be more welcoming to different groups of people trying to do different things with different language. But I'm pretty convinced that if we can listen to the experts and come up with a clear church planting structure and work with the people who have something to teach us about this, we could probably be successful. After all, there are literally thousands of Christian churches planted every single year. And although many of them don't succeed, hundreds of them do. And I don't see why we shouldn't have a similar record of success, or even a better one, given that the cultural winds are blowing in our direction. So that's just the thoughts that I have in response to your presentation, John. And now I'm kind of interested to hear what other people think.
Me too. So Jay, can you switch us to gallery mode and we'll join the Hollywood Squares? And I can take questions. Emily, I see you have your hand up. And please check in the chat for something Emily put there, everyone.
Yeah, so one thing that really stood out to me that James mentioned is that concept of expectations that the institution, meaning in this case, the AEU, or the members of that local community put on the future, the goals and structure of that group. I do think that I agree with you, James, that I think that AEU can be sort of flexible in, not saying, okay, all ethical societies need to have all of the things that we, want a great big thriving community to have. They're not all going to be necessarily, the able to maintain a building and membership numbers like our bigger groups. But there still should be some clear expectations of, what values and curriculum are there, what structure like committees and ability to create a task force and, clear bylaws are there. And I think that the other struggle when it comes to what the members of that group have for expectations, yes, you have some people who, and this is more of a general movement, not ethical culture specific concept, but you have people who basically just want a group of friends, like a club. And so they are uncomfortable with the idea of, of having affinity groups or meeting in multiple locations or covering certain topics. But we would like our groups to not only include, but serve lots of people, and the expanding definition of non-believers, non-theistics, humanists, etc. So they're and not have people feel like they're alone in their region. So finding that way that that groups can be fully satisfying and meet the needs of people, when recognizing that that takes a certain level of skill and understanding and communication amongst the members. So I know that's not really a question, it's really a reflection, but I guess in summary, I'm just trying to say that it would be ideal if our institutions were able to to support local groups at various levels of what the expectations or needs of those group members are.
Thank you, Emily.
I have a thought about that. I think you're right. And I think a lot of our challenges in building new societies come down in part to the fact that while when you're trying to plant a Christian church, you might be trying to do it in any state, city, rural, any community in the United States, but mostly people have a pretty accurate mental model of what a church is supposed to look like when they're done, right? They know what they're trying to build toward and what it isn't, right? They know that it isn't a group where friends just hang out and chat with each other. They know that it isn't a club to listen to intellectual lectures. They know the things that it isn't and what broadly it is. And when we plant ethical societies, people generally don't have an existing mental category for the type of thing we're trying to build. And I think that that leads to two problems. Firstly, people with inappropriate expectations and desires come to us thinking that we'll help them build something that really we don't want to help them build, right? Like we don't want to build AHA groups, right? We don't want to build Center for Inquiry groups. What we do, at least I'm proposing, is build congregations. We build non-theistic congregations. That is a particular thing, right? And so we have to be confident saying to people, honestly, if what you want is a club to listen to an intellectual lecture, great. We're not going to help you build that because that's not what we do. And instead, I feel like what sometimes we're so happy that anyone's interested, we try and bend over backwards to help them make what they want, even if it's got nothing to do with what an ethical society is. And that causes profound mission drift and confusion, and it forces us to try and help people do things that we have no experience in helping them do. And so I think that one of the things that the national organization can be really clear about is here is what an ethical society is. Here is what an ethical society isn't. It may have a different structure and it may have staff or not. It may be in a building or not. That's not core to the definition. The core to the definition is it's a congregational community. It engages people's hearts and emotions as well as their minds. We expect you to develop deep relationships with other people. You have to actually be committed to it as an individual. You can't just be an audience member. That's not what being a member of a church is, right? We are looking for life change. We have a high expectation about behavior and values. We're not a service provider, so being very clear about what an ethical society is and is not, I think would help filter out some people who have wrong expectations about what we're trying to build, and also make it easier for us to guide people towards what we want them to do.
Thank you, James. Laura, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I have maybe a heretical question. I'm really wondering if either of you have come across literature that talks about the difference between how, let's say, an evangelical megachurch gets started and literally rises up, and what you guys are looking at and proposing. And I want to propose that one of the differences, although I think it's a similarity in terms of Adler, is charisma. He was a charismatic leader. Most of these leaders of the new mega churches, well, they're not new anymore, and evangelicals are very out there, very big, very charismatic in their way. And I wonder how and if that is an ingredient that is often needed in the spark that gets something started.
I can briefly comment. The book that I've been using to foster communications about enlivening ethical societies includes an excerpt from the same author's book called The In-Between Church, and it's a really good reference about the different styles of congregation. I learned a lot about this at Wes. from Mary Herman, who did a lot of work with our members about that. And it noted that the role of that kind of a figure is important in certain phases of a growing organization. And so one of those phases is the kind of notional size I put there as the ideal target, which I appreciate James's commentary about being a little bit more flexible about what that looks like. But a community with 150 people on a Sunday tends to organize itself around a figure that really people who gives an inspiring talk, who has a central figure of people to depend upon. But smaller than that, less so, and larger than that, less so. So if you have like 250 people, I mean, a few of our societies have flirted with that. Our society flirted with that. Once you have that many people, then it's actually not too good for you to be too dependent upon one person, because even a workaholic full-time person cannot hold together a community of that size. They have to be in supporting groups to do different programs. And it's not until you get up to the, 400 or 500 people on a Sunday where you're back to the mega church pastor. So I hope that's not too pointy headed, but I guess I want to say that at least the literature and the experts indicate that it's sometimes that's helpful and sometimes it's not ideal, depending upon the dynamics of your organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good organizational view. And then in terms of what about when you start a new ethical society, right? Do you need an inspiring, charismatic individual? Well, from what I've read, what you need more is a process that you follow rigorously and a group of key people committed to the process. That is essential. On the other hand, once you launch the thing, you actually start meeting. And that's something to take away from this research, is that there's a big difference between the preparation phase and now we are an open congregation, and we don't make that distinction clear enough, right? We kind of think, oh, let's get people going too quick, right? And then is this the congregation? Well, no, it's not yet, because they haven't done everything that needs to be in place to make it a congregation. But once you open, what the vast majority of religious communities do when they gather in community is listen to music and listen to a talk. Right? I was reading a really great book on congregations called Congregations in America. It's probably the best sociological study of contemporary congregations in the United States. And he basically breaks it down as that's what congregations do. They have a talk, they listen to music. The vast majority of them, that is the two things they do. Now, if that's the case, then you need someone who can actually give a good talk. Like, it really matters that the quality of that is good. And just like you need some people who can play good music, and it matters if the music is not good, you need someone who can give a good talk, and it matters if the talk is not good.
That was something that a friend of mine who was on the search committee for the search that Wes has just recently concluded said that was a big desire when they surveyed our community in Washington, was they wanted someone who gave a really good talk, and that's one of the reasons they recommended the person they did, KC.
John, I just saying that made me think of something. So we track a lot of data in St. Louis. And one of the things we track is how many people come on Sunday, right? For a given Sunday, how many people come either online or in person nowadays? Now we're hybrid. And we do find a significant relationship between getting someone who people know is a good speaker to speak on Sunday and people coming, right? More people will come if the person who is speaking is known to be a good speaker.
Yeah, they're looking for inspiration.
I mean, when I started doing my final preparation for this talk, I didn't expect I'd come to the conclusion I did. And I may be wrong, and I probably will when AEU assemblies in the rearview mirror, I will do some research, probably with the archivist, if there is such a person, or someone at the New York Society, to find out how much did they raise from rank and file members of the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and how much were they dependent upon a small number of big dollar donors? Because that was kind of my impression, was that big for the kickoff. Let me give a quick example, then I'll be quiet to hear from other people. But when I was briefly a seminarian, I was briefly a leader in training with the AEU, and I was attending a UU seminary. And someone who was attending at the same time as I shortly after she graduated. Her name was Renee Ruckholtz. She was tasked with helping a big high dollar investment kickoff of a congregation, a UU congregation in Pennsylvania. And they put big money, like a couple $100,000 into fully staffing, having a nice rented space, what they call Sunday school program for the youth, a lot of money to really have a major kickoff, a lot of funding from the denomination, and it didn't work. It never became self-sustaining. And after 2 or 3 years, it had to shrink back to a small, locally funded organization that looked a little like the family style, maybe a little bigger than the family style. I watched that really closely because I knew that people in my own society had been involved in the New Society Development Project back around the year 2000. It's really hard, and there is some science out there, and I'm still learning. And I'll be honest, I was a little nervous about presenting today because I am really just trying and trying things out with very little personal experience. So I just wanted to share what I had learned and heard. James, unless you have some other comment, I can go to our next question. Hi, Joy.
Hi, John and everyone. It's great to see you, James. So this used to be a major part of my job when I was the growth and development professional for the American Ethical Union during the 90s. And I traveled all over the United States, talking with people, working with people who wanted to start an ethical society. And some of them had been part of an ethical society before, and some of them hadn't. And I would say basically during that time, we were a failure. I was a failure, perhaps. It was such a mixed bag. Let me tell you where I thought the faults were. Sometimes it was someone who wanted just a group of people to sit around and talk and be friends. And in other places, there was someone with a big ego who wanted to run the show and expected everyone to follow along. And that broke up a group. And that person was someone who'd been on the Growth and Development Committee. And we had a model that we were working with that's very similar to what you all have been talking about, which is finding it's better if you've a core group. Like before you go there, there's already a group of people that's been meeting and thinking about it. But if you're starting with just someone who's on fire, someone who's got the vision, and we found people like that. But basically, they wanted the AEU to come in and do it for them. They didn't want to have to do the hard work themselves. And I think those were the problems that I met up face to face. And we had a few groups who started and went on for even several years, but there was always a flaw in it. And my theory was that the first thing you had to do was to build a core group. And it was really like the model you were showing in your graphics, John, of people who had a common vision, who were committed to each other, who cared about each other, and who were building a caring community, and who wanted to do something in their community to make it better and to make themselves better. And for me, that was the core. And trying to express that to people when I went out and visited these small groups was very difficult. There was I found a lot of egos involved, that people were jockeying for position. And you really have to have the shared vision and the commitment to sharing the work, really. So that's what I learned. And I've been so eager to see what's coming out in these days. And it sounds like what you and James are talking about is really what I thought when I left my position because I was no longer able to do it, that that I still carried this vision of this is how it could be done, is building this core group of people who are committed to an idea and to each other, and who are willing to share equally. It's a kind of letting go of your ego. And
Yeah.
if one of those people happens to be a charismatic speaker, and one of those other people happens to be a brilliant musician, you're on your way.
Yes. I think the key, firstly, I was wrong clearly when I said we didn't have an expert in this. We should definitely mine your expertise, Joy, because that experience is so valuable, particularly
Yeah.
traveling around the country to speak to people who wanted to do this and knowing the common pitfalls. I think we have some opportunities because of our unusual, the unusual type of movement that we are, and also some dangers that that brings along with it. We are able to be flexible and do what works because we're not committed to any particular congregational model per se. We're not committed to any particular leadership structure per se. We don't even have like a scripture or a text to organize this all around. So we can basically do what we want. And that's a great benefit. We also have challenges. And I think one of them that you referred to, Joy, is congregations will succeed if they are developed by a core group of people who are clear about a shared mission that is bigger than any of them. And traditional religions, it's pretty easy to see what that is, right? Like they've got all the resources to be able to, a group of Christians wants to come together and make a church in their tradition. They know what the bigger picture is supposed to be because it's in the Bible and they've heard it every Sunday for much of their lives. And, they can point to it's not about us, it's about Jesus, I've noticed that many times we struggle to articulate our bigger vision. And because we struggle to articulate our bigger vision, it's harder to get teams to buy into it. And because we're so don't want to say desperate, we are desperate for people to come to us and want what we do and care about what we do, that sometimes we're tricked into trying to expending resources to help people do something when they haven't actually understood the vision, right? They never got to the point where they understood what we're trying to actually do. And so we get frustrated because there are people who are interested, but it turns out that what they were interested in is not actually what we offer. They were interested in a friendship group or a lecture group or a group to talk about how crap religion is, whatever it is. And that's not what we offer. So a lot of this starts with being clear about what it is we offer, right? About being very clear in ourselves, what is it we're trying to do? And then we can communicate this to the small teams and see if there's a match.
There's a group that Bart has been working with, and I've helped out a little bit as well. And they had a very toxic person in a book group they had started, and part of my work was helping the primary organizer very gently set some limits without blowing everything up. And the person did end up quitting without breaking up the group. So Joy, I know of which you speak. I wanted to say how much I appreciate your not only sharing your efforts, but also acknowledging that it didn't work all that well, because I can learn from what didn't work as much as I can learn from what did. And I think it takes courage to talk about both yay us, and also to say, I'm a clergy leader washout, so I failed leader training, so I went back to being a clinician. But I do appreciate a chance to to try to learn and contribute. So thank you for your comments, and I agree with James. We have you as a resource, and I appreciate that. We have another hand. Jeff Smith, are you? Can you hear me? I don't see you on camera.
I know the camera's not pointed at me. That's why. I have to admit to being a clerical error. I attended Protestant seminary and was never ordained.
Clerical error.
And so I have been through the drama of churches. I've been trained to manage churches And that's what the Protestant pastor does, is he manages the church. And I've seen some very successful examples of that. When I did my field work at Riverside Church, and William Sloane Coffin, that terrible commie radical resist member, was beloved by the people that wanted religion the same as it was when they were a kid. So when we're talking about leadership, I think it's not only the leader that can project some credible image, it's also listening to where the flock is coming from, and it won't necessarily be a unified voice. And that dialogue has to be organized in different ways. I mean, colloquy for our organization has been one of the main on-ramps for new members, because it's such a good dialogue and acquaintance with what is ethical culture. And the other thing which goes in the negative direction, I find, is that a lot of ethical culture people are former something else. And so they're rejectionist of their Christian roots, their Jewish roots, their Hindu roots, and they're more concerned about not being like any other religion, not being spiritual. I mean, spirituality is something that we have to embrace. Belief in God is optional. So that to project something that isn't open is going to leave people, and James talks about it's going to leave them to their own category. So you've got to look for that category and say, well, we engage with you and we try to make each other better and find a consensus, find out what this is about. It's collective. It's not, I'm the authority and you listen to me and then you'll come over to our side. That should not be the dynamic. And usually it works out in social hour. People get very comfortable. But in some of the other stuff, people will be thinking something different, and there won't be an opportunity to engage and sort of develop a consensus, develop a sense of a congregation. We are congregated together. What is that unified purpose? You can't find out unless you discuss it and exchange honestly. And that's the leader, that's the congregation, recognizing that perspective, I think.
I have nothing to add, James. Great. Scott and/or Sue? You're muted.
There we go.
Okay, I enjoyed hearing from Joy and James about forming a core group. We think we in Chicago have that core group from our past experiences. We probably pretty well know what our goal is and where we're trying to work, but we've been plateaued since basically before COVID and haven't grown at all in the intervening couple of years. So I guess you can use us as a guinea pig of where our esteemed experts think we should go from here.
We want to get, we don't want too many gray hairs, because I've got a whole gray hair. Thing. We want to get younger people involved, and it's, where does Chicago's basically virtual and has no plans at this point to go unvirtual, except for when they have their notorious potlucks.
Can either of you make it to the 4:30 workshop today?
Yes.
Maybe he will.
I can.
Yeah.
So you won't get anything from me. Maybe I think James can probably offer some thoughts directly. I can provide you with a book and a book discussion.
Yeah, we should definitely chat offline about that, because I actually think that that challenge, which is what so many of our existing societies have, is different. I think you've planted the church, right? You had the core team, you were clear about what you wanted to build, and you built it. Now, COVID has messed everything up for everyone. The truth is no one knows what to do about COVID. And the number of organizations like ours, which are being successful through COVID and post-COVID, it is very small. So that's a big question mark. But in terms of how to go from so you can call it plateaued, right? Or you can call it steady core participants, right? You've achieved a place where you have a steady number of core participants, and now you want to grow, right? That's, I think, a different challenge than planting. So I'm happy to talk about it, to give ideas. The only other thing I'd say is, I heard you say, Sue, that you don't want more older folks. You know, going back to that thing about focusing, that might not be right. Like, I know that all of our societies desperately want to be the society where everybody comes, like, regardless of their age, regardless of their marital status, regardless of their race, but that's not realistic. Actually, it might be better to say, no, we are a congregation focused on older people. That's what we do well. We're proud of that. So we're going to program everything towards that. It might be better. So don't be worried. If that's what works for you, that's what works.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I'm going to make another little comment about in our Quaker meeting, they do not list who's talking because they have a megastar who, if they found that people would only show up when he was the boss. So they don't even say what the topic will be, which sort of drives me crazy because I used to know what was going on. But no, we understand what goes. Thank you.
Better solution, find more megastars. You do actually want the people who bring the people in. That's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just to be clear, the 4:30 workshop today, it's about existing societies. It's not about planting. It is about redeveloping and revitalizing existing societies. I'm going to briefly share my screen to show a very useful graphic from Alice Mann's book. That if you all can see this, it shows that when societies are kind of plateaued in stability phase, there are opportunities for ongoing renewal. And if they're beginning to lose steam or are still trying to get steam, there are some ideas about revitalization. So just wanted to mention that, please do talk to James offline, but we may be able to offer some things in the 4:30 workshop also. All right, Jen, you have your hand up.
I would be interested, and I'm gonna put Patty on the spot to find out what her reaction and experiences were in founding Shenandoah Valley in light of this presentation.
So is that being directed to me?
Yes, Patty.
Yeah, hi, yeah. So that, Susquehanna Valley Society, which is in Pennsylvania. And I would say if we had to do it, or if I had to do it over again, I might have taken on more of the process that John and James was saying, taking our time and really developing that core group. We went through this because it's who I am. When I'm passionate about something, I want to get it going, and I will do whatever I can to do that, and maybe miss some things along the way. So really what happened with us, we had a core group. We organized very quickly, went out and became public just within, a couple of months of being, meeting this core group. And what happened was that core group really kind of didn't even understand the big picture. We thought we did. We thought everyone was sort of on the same, playing field, but because we really didn't take that time to really get to know one another, we found out that not everyone was seeing the vision, and therefore we had some board members drop off in a huff because they felt that it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. And so I really will say I agree the importance of really taking that time to build that relationship with the core, making sure that everyone is understood, so that as you get going through the process and you start going public and really getting to work, you find out that some of those folks weren't sharing the vision. Now, I'd say we are a success at SVES. We've worked hard. We've had, we haven't grown astronomically, but we are steady, and we have the desire to keep ourselves going. So, yeah. Is that Jan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Patty, can I ask you a question following up on that? Because I think your experience is
Okay.
very valuable. Because
Yeah.
firstly, you are a success. You're a big success. You're serving a genuine community need by doing what you do. And you're doing it consistently. And from everything I hear with, high level of quality, and that is a success. The question I had is, so you said that one of your challenges was that the core kind of leadership team who became the board weren't all committed to the same vision. What were some of the differences in view about what the organization or the community should be that you experienced?
Their understanding of what the AEU was all about. They really, they really did not take it upon themselves to learn everything they could about the larger organization. And so the mission, they didn't have a clear sense of the mission. And now, who's at fault? I guess I take it upon myself when I learn everything I can about what it is I'm involved in. And I felt that I was very clear of the mission, and the others, and two, it could be, I was retired when I founded Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society. I had all the time in the world to devote myself to it. The other core members, they were working. They were, the commitment probably wasn't as refined as mine.
So that points to a space for the AEU to play a role in being very, very clear about its own mission and what sort of communities that it wants to create, and making that information really accessible, and facilitating a process by which potential leadership teams for new communities really get a sense of what it is and isn't. Right? And I think that's one of the roles that the national organization can play. That's a very useful experience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being willing, Patty, to talk about something very close to your heart.
Yes. Yes.
Go ahead, Bart.
Yeah, so being someone who's been kind of tasked with doing a fair number of these things over the past number of years, I do have a few thoughts about the things that have been happening. The first, I just want to assure people that it hasn't been the case that we've been dumping scads of resources into dry wells. We actually haven't been putting a lot of resources into things. We've been trying to develop the core leadership teams, and then work slowly from there. So that really has been a goal. What I've been finding is that is a particularly difficult thing to do, apparently. As with Patty's experience, you can get people together and people get excited and they get working. And it's been difficult to maintain, or at least difficult for that to become a strong working group where there's shared sense of leadership and responsibilities. And I think our philosophy and our culture do complicate that for people. We don't have a strong sense of trust and authority, for instance. or trust that somebody has the way to go, and that we should follow that. And even our ultimate vision of a world where people are, where that's just and compassionate. Well, that you don't know what that looks like until you get there, right? And so people can have very many different ideas about what is most important, what we should be aiming for, what we should be doing. And so it's just complicated. Not saying that it's impossible, but it's harder. And I think I mostly just want to thank people who take on the challenge, and to say that it's really important, it's vital, and it's hard. That's all.
I appreciate what you said, Bart, and I think I was remiss in not actively inviting you to have some remarks prior to open Q&A. And Bart has been a valuable colleague and help me get oriented as the membership committee transition to doing more in this area. I can identify a couple of types of dry wells because I remember Bill All, I don't know if Bill's on this call. One of the things he thought was really important was for the AEU to not drop the ball, to not fail to follow up any overture. And if you saw, the key way that we hear about these people is they contact us. And so, and I can't tell you how many people fill out our online form and they say, I want to start an ethical society in my area. And then I email them, no response. I email them again 2 weeks later, still no response. And sometimes I'll email a third time 2 months later and no response at all. Or that's the most common. And then about the 1/3 of folks who actually respond, about half of those folks really want us to provide them with a full service. Please come and set things up for us, and we'll come, but we'd like you to provide all these services for us. Among those who remaining, a half of 1/3 or less, I had one woman in Huntsville, Alabama, who wanted to know about the use of our name. And she sounded really great. She was an entrepreneur. She did IT. She was a mom who wanted all the moms and kids in her preschool to have a Sunday school experience. And I was like, oh my God, this would be great. But she really seemed to have really no interest in any sort of an oversight of the organization. She wanted to use her name. And when I explained that, we've been sued by people who want to say we're not a real religion, et cetera, we have to be careful. She ghosted me and dropped out of a follow-up call. So there definitely are situations where there are a lot of dry wells, and so it is a very small percentage that we do try to stay with. So I had another comment, but I've forgotten. So I'll stop here.
It's an interesting thing because it raises the question of what could the AEU provide that would be genuinely helpful to people trying to start new societies in their area? And what are we being asked to provide that isn't actually helpful, that would take agency away from those people, or which would prevent them from doing the difficult work they need to do to get clear about what they want to build, etc. There are things, I think we could make a list of those two things, right? Of these are things we really should provide. Like we probably should really provide a template website, which new groups can just take and modify for themselves. That would be very valuable for many of our existing societies, which still have abominable websites, and we really need to fix that, and it's not difficult to fix, and we could probably do that quite quickly. We could probably provide templates for all sorts of beginning literature and stuff like that, and basically a branding structure for these new organizations for when they get to the point where they can start meeting. But what we don't want to do is provide something like a governance structure and a inner box, like this is how many people you need in your team. We need to be able to kind of coach the groups that exist to be able to come up with those answers themselves, because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be running it. But we should probably do that exercise and be like, what do we need to provide from the national organization? What do the local groups need to provide themselves? The other question is, do we always have to wait until we have interested party there? Because church planters don't. They don't actually wait to get an invitation to come to a city. They decide where they're going to plant a church, and then they find the people there who are interested in planting it. And we could do that. That doesn't mean quite like a revival experience, although Sunday Assembly's experience is interesting. They basically took a revival model. They did the Adler thing and went to cities all over the world, and they provided an inspiring and exciting event. And then people who went to that event wanted more of that, and then they helped them follow up. And there are, they went up to about 70 globally Sunday assemblies in a very short amount of time, and now there's about 25, right, which is about as many we have, right? And that over a course of a very few years with no money, like zero money, zero professional support. And so there are different models than just waiting for people to send us an email. We could look at our target market and say, which cities really need an ethical society that we think could sustain one? Let's plant one there. They do call it church planting after all. Yes.
I am very interested. I am familiar with a couple of efforts and which have had mixed success. So everything seems to, I am racking my brain looking for what the secret sauce is, because I know that I easily could find myself in the same stuck place as very smart people who have already spoken today about efforts that didn't work. And so I have racked my brain to say, all right, I have this person, they're returning my calls. I've had 2 Zoom conversations with them. Don't blow it, Dakin. So I had it in my slide, and I'm kind of, it's, guys aren't supposed to put hearts and flowers on their slides, but I did it. So I want to share my screen again, just to show the part of this talk that is the thing I'm racking my brain to try to do correctly. And that, shoot, I am trying to see where it is. I'm trying to, the spot, I'll just describe it for everybody. The spot where I described approaching someone in a community who has expressed interest, and where I approach them and the little arrow appears and then the little heart appears. So I have a couple of people I'm working with right now. One of them is a doctorate in education, and he's read a couple of books by Adler. But another one is a computer programmer who's read a little bit and not so much. How can I really connect with them in a supportive way that doesn't reduce their agency, but really models our philosophy and this idea of eliciting the best and inherent worth and dignity? So I'm just putting it all on the table here. That is what I am trying to do to see if it might work. I'll stop there. I don't see other hands though, but we are out of time. So that is a nice coincidence. So I guess I want to appreciate James for accepting my invitation to come here and share his thoughts. I'll miss you. We have you for a little while longer. And Bard and all of you all for coming today. I hope you'll come back at 4:30 for our next workshop.
Thanks, everyone.